In 9 minutes, Judge Clarence Thomas accused Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt of treason and threatened to jail her right in the courtroom, while cameras recorded everything live and millions of Americans watched on their screens. But no one expected Leavitt to pull a crumpled letter from a grieving mother who lost her son in a military operation out of her leather briefcase. And suddenly the courtroom fell silent, the jurors were moved, the reporters were stunned, and Judge Thomas's hands began to tremble because the truth she revealed shattered the accusation and woke up the entire nation. And this was no longer a trial, but a powerful moment when Karoline Leavitt stood alone carrying the truth. It was a cold morning in Washington, D.C. Gray clouds hovered above like a warning, and the federal courtroom was packed with reporters gripping their recorders, senators sitting upright, and the public holding their breath while the cameras scanned the room filled with tension as rumors swirled that Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House spokesperson in history, was facing treason charges for leaking information about Operation Iron Veil, a failed mission that cost the lives of soldiers. And when Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas entered wearing his black robe with piercing eyes, he was no longer just an observer, but the one in charge, and his gavel slammed down, breaking the silence, turning the courtroom into a place where power and truth were set to clash as all eyes turned to the heavy door. It creaked open, and Karoline Leavitt stepped inside, walking steadily, her red dress simple, yet bold, her leather briefcase showing signs of wear. And she walked with no lawyer, no advisor, no one beside her, just herself facing the entire system. And the crowd held its breath as a young reporter whispered she's crazy for coming alone. And a senator mocked the youth, but Leavitt ignored them all, her eyes fixed only on Judge Thomas as she reached the table and slowly opened her briefcase, the small click echoing as anticipation spread, not fear. And she stood there not like a defendant, but like someone ready to reveal something powerful. And then Judge Thomas struck the gavel again, and with a deep voice filled with authority, he told her she was accused of treason for revealing classified information about the military operation, and her actions had caused serious consequences and endangered more lives. And he asked her if she understood the gravity of the accusation, but Leavitt's face stayed calm, without fear, without emotion, and she looked him in the eyes and smiled just slightly enough for a reporter to note that she wasn't afraid. And then she asked if he had read what was in her briefcase, and her hand rested on it gently, and that question hung in the air like a door waiting to be opened. And suddenly the room froze. A juror leaned forward, a reporter forgot to press record, and for the first time Judge Thomas looked unsure. And just when the silence grew too heavy, Leavitt took one step forward and said, "Let's begin, because the truth does not wait." And she opened the briefcase with a sharp click and pulled out a thin, crumpled letter, not official, not marked secret, but held with both hands as if it were a sacred object. And the entire courtroom held its breath as she began to read it, her voice low and strong. And she said, "I am Laura Bennett, and I write this letter because I have no one left to beg." And she explained how her son, James Bennett, died in an operation she never knew the name of, and how men in uniform brought her a flag and called him a hero, but gave her no answers and told her it was classified, and that national security was more important than her pain. And every night she closed his door, knowing someone was hiding the truth. And as Leavitt read the words, the courtroom grew even quieter, and a juror covered her mouth, and a woman began to cry, and a reporter stopped typing as each word from the letter landed like a blow on the walls of silence. And in that moment, everyone understood that this was not about politics or power anymore, but about the cost of truth and the pain of a mother left behind. Moments before everything stopped, Leavitt stood with her eyes locked ahead, her expression furious, as she held a short letter that seemed to carve itself into the room, turning the courtroom into something deeper than law, a place filled with pain and truth. She paused and looked up, saying, "This isn't legal evidence. This is a mother's voice stripped of truth." Holding the letter so its creases and stains caught the light, she explained it was sent to the White House where she worked, and though she had been told to destroy it, she kept it, because James Bennett wasn't just a number, he was Laura Bennett's son, and deserved to be remembered. The courtroom changed. A mockery disappeared. A senator who had scoffed earlier now rubbed his forehead, and a young reporter wiped her eyes quietly. Even Clarence Thomas showed signs of discomfort trying to speak, but falling silent, Leavitt walked slowly toward the jury, still holding the letter. She didn't wave it or shout. She simply let it speak, then said Laura Bennett didn't want money or fame, just the truth about her son's final moments. But the government chose silence over compassion. Someone in the audience sobbed. A veteran bowed his head, and jurors showed their emotions, no longer hiding behind neutrality. Leavitt placed the letter gently on the table as if laying a flower on a grave, then spoke again, asking, What real treason is seeking truth, or burying voices like Laura Bennett's? She wasn't offending herself. She was speaking so James Bennett could be heard. The courtroom no longer felt like a place of judgment. It became sacred with cameras, focusing on Leavitt's face not like a defendant, but like someone carrying light. Even Thomas's cold gaze shifted slightly. The letter remained like a quiet fire on the table, and silence filled the air thick with anticipation. Leavitt touched her worn leather briefcase. The click of its latch loud in the stillness, and she pulled out declassified documents titled Operation Iron Veil. With a sharp red stamp, she placed them deliberately, as if placing chess pieces, and read aloud. James Bennett had survived 38 minutes after being wounded, but no help came. Because resources were sent to private contractors, the words hit the room like a hammer. A juror clenched his fists, while others listened frozen. She continued reading the report, stating that survival was possible if action had been taken, but none was. It wasn't chaos. It was a choice. The words caused the reporter to drop her pen. Clarence Thomas tried to interrupt, but Leavitt stood firm, saying the documents were declassified and truth didn't need permission. She nodded toward the side door, and Laura Bennett entered wearing a dark coat, holding a photo of her son. She walked with quiet strength and stood at the witness stand, speaking softly, but clearly introducing herself and showing Nathan's photo. She said he had dreams of flying, but was returned in a coffin, and no one told her why. She didn't want apologies. She wanted the truth, and said Nathan died not because of war, but because profit was placed above his life. The air felt drained. The juror wept. A veteran trembled. Laura raised her son's photo, saying he deserved to be saved, not forgotten. Leavitt stood beside her, saying nothing, letting the silence carry the weight. Thomas remained still, but his hand shook a little. Leavitt spoke to the jury, saying the truth couldn't stay buried, and those in power made the choice to abandon James Bennett. Then she reached for the briefcase again, but this time pulled out a small USB device, saying it held what others didn't want revealed. She handed it to a court officer, who played it through the speakers before the audio began. Leavitt gave another signal, and Dr. Rachel Collins entered, a military doctor carrying the weight of memory. She took the stand and said she had treated James Bennett in the Middle East. He was still alive, whispering to tell his mother not to worry. But she had no equipment, no support, and was told the case was classified and help was denied. She said he died not because of the enemy, but because they let him slip away. A juror turned away, shaking the courtroom, silent, like a grave. Then she addressed Thomas directly, saying she had lived with the memory every day and was not seeking forgiveness, just to tell the truth that couldn't be buried. She stepped away, and Leavitt took the microphone, saying Rachel's words stood alone. Then she played a recording of Thomas's own voice, saying if the mother digs too deep, let her get lost in paperwork, and that this must not get out the room. Erupted. A reporter dropped a recorder. A juror gasped. Leavitt announced the audio was now posted online, and the world was listening. The judge tried to shout her down, but she spoke over him, saying rules that hide death and protect greed are not justice. She held up the USB as if it were a weapon. Declare. It was his voice, ordering a mother's silence. The courtroom burst into chaos. Phones lit up. People whispered, and Thomas looked defeated. Leavitt said they weren't judging her, but the system that failed James Bennett and others like him. Then she walked to a wooden chair in the corner, dragging it to the center of the room. It scraped against the floor, pulling everyone's attention. She stood beside it, tracing its worn surface, and explained this was James's chair from his mother's kitchen, where he sat dreaming of becoming a pilot. Now it would stay empty forever. The room was silent with reverence, not fear. A juror cried. A veteran clenched his fists, and everyone stared at the chair, now a symbol of loss and memory. Leavitt didn't shout or perform, but made the chair the heart of the courtroom, and then gave one final signal, opening the door once more. That a young girl stepped forward, named Emma Bennett. She was 12 years old and wore a pale green sweater with her hair tied in a ponytail. She looked small, but walked steadily, holding something tightly in her hands. The whole courtroom watched her. Without making a sound, she stood beside Leavitt and looked around before her eyes fell on the empty chair. She did not cry, but her lips were pressed tight, like she was holding back a promise. Leavitt knelt down and gave her the microphone, and Emma's voice was soft but clear as she said, Nathan was my brother. And she opened her hand, showing an old military medal with a frayed ribbon and scratched metal. She said he had promised to teach her to drive and take her places if she studied hard, but he never came back, and no one told her why. The courtroom went silent as a reporter stopped typing, and a juror turned away, trying to hide his tears. Emma raised the medal with a trembling hand and said she kept it under her bed, thinking Nathan would be proud, but now she wanted Miss Leavitt to have it, because she Told the truth, Emma gave her the medal like she was giving away a part of her heart, and Leavitt took it with trembling hands, her eyes full of tears for the first time during the trial. She didn't try to hide them. She held the medal gently and turned to the jury saying Emma wasn't here to accuse anyone, but to remind them that James Bennett wasn't just a name. He was a brother and a son taken not by war, but by decisions made in secret. The room was silent. Even the Judge Thomas didn't move. He just stared at Emma, the woman with the silk scarf, dab her eyes, as Leavitt placed the medal beside the chair like laying a flower on a grave, and said this chair isn't just evidence, it's a reminder that every decision we make leaves a space. We can't bring Nathan back, but we can give Emma the truth. She stood back and looked around the room. The courtroom felt more like a memorial, now not a place of judgment. Thomas bowed his head for the first time, and Leavitt stood by the chair, James Bennett's medal. Beside it, glowing like a quiet candle, Emma held Leavitt's hand for a moment before leaving, and everyone stayed silent, not wanting to break the moment. Thomas sat still, his eyes lost, as if seeing something too real. Leavitt went back to her table, not looking at Thomas, but at the people in the room, as if remembering each face. She didn't say more, because the chair, the medal, and Nathan's story had already spoken for her. The cameras captured her, standing in her red dress still, and strong reporters stopped. Writing spectators stopped whispering, and Thomas suddenly stood without saying anything and signaled the trial was over. No verdict, no announcement, just silence. As Leavitt packed her bag calm, like someone who had done what they came to do, she walked out the door, which closed with a heavy sound like the end of a sad chapter. Hours later, news spread everywhere. A short statement from the Supreme Court said Clarence Thomas resigned, no reason given, no comment, no speech, just a line, as if he wanted to disappear. Online, people reacted quickly, posting photos of the wooden chair and saying Leavitt did it. The media rushed to report that a 27-year-old woman had brought down a powerful judge outside the courtroom. A huge crowd waited quietly, not cheering, but watching as Leavitt passed among them. Some held photos of loved ones. A boy held a sign saying Nathan is not forgotten. Leavitt didn't wave. She just nodded, holding Laura's letter and Emma's medal like she was carrying their voices. She got into a car and looked at her phone, where she saw a post showing the wooden chair called Forgotten and comments listing names of lost loved ones. She shared the post and started an online memorial where families could tell their stories. Soon thousands joined, sharing about people like James Bennett, and others never named. Leavitt stared out the window, calm but firm, knowing she had risked everything to tell the truth. The crowd outside stood not to celebrate but to witness, because they knew, like she did, that justice comes from truth being spoken. Later, Leavitt sat on the porch of a quiet house in New Hampshire, the sun fading gently. Her baby son beside her, her mother brought tea, and the peace of the place felt different from the storm of the courtroom. But in her hands, she still held Laura's letter and Emma's medal. And when she opened the letter for the first time since Washington, she found a new note inside from Laura, saying, Caroline, you gave Nathan a voice. I have nothing to give but gratitude. Leavitt smiled, not with pride, but with relief, and she looked at her son and said gently, I did all this so you can grow up in a world where truth isn't hidden. Her son laughed, not understanding, but his clear eyes gave her strength, and she looked out the quiet field. Her phone lit up with another story from the memorial. A woman posted a photo of her son and wrote, Now I know I'm not alone. Leavitt shared it, and her eyes shined, but she didn't cry. She stood holding the letter and medal, a breeze bringing the scent of memory. She thought of James Bennett and Emma and Laura and people she never met, but who became part of her. And she thought of Thomas, who left the bench in silence, not with shame, but with truth finally shown. She thought of herself, once seen as too young, but who made a system listen. She went inside and placed a medal and letter on a shelf beside a family photo to remind herself that truth, even when painful, is always worth standing for. The story of Karoline Leavitt confronting Clarence Thomas shows deep problems in American life, like the way power often hides the truth, the pain of families forgotten, and how young people can lead change. Laura's letter, Nathan's chair, and Emma's medal are symbols that show every voice matters. Leavitt posting the video and starting a memorial shows how social media can help truth spread, like in movements such as Black Lives Matter, but Thomas resigning quietly also shows how the powerful still avoid facing justice. This story teaches us that anyone can make change by telling the truth, even when it's hard. Follow Leavitt's example. Don't be afraid to stand alone. Use your voice on platforms like X to speak up and share the stories of those who've been silenced. Remember that even small actions like Emma giving a medal can inspire in real life. Listen to people like Laura Bennett around you and help them share their truth. Justice begins with small, brave acts from the heart. Thank you for being with us, and see you next time as we keep sharing stories that matter.